Everybody knows Half-Life, along with all of its sequels and the trilogy that never happened, but not many people know about the original game's expansions. Opposing Force and Blue Shift came out about a year from one another to mostly positive reception. So going into these expansions, I expected something as good, if not better, than the original. These expansions do exactly what that label describes. They expand on the base game in a number of different ways. Some of the new additions include new locations, new weapons, and also the same story, but from a new perspective, which is what ended up being the most interesting part of these expansions. Both Opposing Force and Blue Shift take place during the Black Mesa incident that occurred in Half-Life 1, but you see it from two different angles. In Opposing Force, you play as a soldier who is sent to investigate the Black Mesa incident, but is then caught in the middle of the Zen invasion. In Blue Shift, on the other hand, you play as an armed security officer who is just trying to save his people and himself. Taking this approach was honestly the smartest thing Valve could have done because it allows them to reuse a lot of the same assets from the original without making the level seem lazily constructed. If anything, revisiting a lot of these same locations was actually really fun because you got to walk through rooms that were previously inaccessible to Gordon. Speaking of which, returning characters like Gordon Freeman actually make small cameo appearances, giving the game an overall sense of familiarity while still encouraging discovery. I'll take a deeper look at Opposing Force first, being that that was the first one that I played of the two. I booted it up and right off the bat it started to show its age with how quickly I encountered my first bug. The mouse for some reason wasn't responding properly, so the camera would whip back and forth, but thankfully it was an easy and quick fix. Seemingly, it's a bug that is somewhat common on modern systems given the fact that it's one of the top results in the forums page, and all I had to do was select the correct mouse settings from the settings menu and you're good to go. But unfortunately for the game, this wasn't the only bug I encountered. Later on in the game, I found myself getting repeatedly stuck on the ground in elevators as they load you into the next section of the level, and the only way to get unstuck is to reload a save file. And for me, the only way that I found to avoid the bug entirely was to basically just time a jump perfectly so that you're not touching the ground when you load into the next area. It's possible that there is a fix out there to prevent this from happening, but I didn't bother to look for it considering the fact that these expansions are only a few hours long. But even with how short they are, I did encounter the same bug multiple times in my playthrough. These were the only two major bugs that I encountered, and thankfully they weren't anything game breaking because the rest of the expansion is actually quite good. Opposing Force opens up with the player in a helicopter along with the rest of his squad as they discuss their deployment, and one thing that we should all know about anyone riding a helicopter in any form of media is that the helicopter will probably be shot down at some point with minimal to no surviving bodies. And just like Hollywood has taught us, the main character is one of the few survivors who conveniently survives the entire initial attack, even though he was completely unconscious for most of it.
Get down! Oh.
Nonetheless, when you are finally able to take control, you are tasked with reaching an extraction point and escaping the facility. Similar to the base game, the story isn't anything special. It mostly focuses on adding more context to the already established lore and story, but that's honestly the thing that makes this game interesting, because you're now viewing the events from the perspective of a character that in the base game would be considered an enemy. So this entire expansion actually provides a lot more nuance to the Black Mesa incident, because you get to see the motivations of the people that you were indiscriminately murdering in the original game. You begin to realize that Gordon Freeman was kinda sorta maybe a little psychotic for just straight up killing damn near an entire military force without asking any questions. But along with Gordon, you also see other returning characters like G-Man himself, and many references are made to sequences that occurred in the original game.
Come in, Cooper. Do you copy? Forget about Freeman. We're abandoning the base. If you have any last bomb targets, mark them on the tactical map. Otherwise, get the hell out of there.
As fun as these cameos and throwbacks are, they don't beat the new additions to the game. Most of those new additions are made to the arsenal of weapons available for the player to experiment with. Given that this is just an expansion, the core gameplay is pretty much the same as the base game, but the new weapons give the player different ways to approach each encounter. Where the original game had a total of about 14 different weapons, Opposing Force replaced nearly every weapon and added 3 more for a total of 17 unique weapons to play with. While most of the weapons are just respect and reskinned weapons for the expansion, other weapons do significantly more to change the gameplay loop. One of the new additions was the grapple gun. As fun as it sounds though, modern game design has definitely reduced the impact and creativity that one would have felt back in the day, because so many games today have done grappling hooks so well that the grappling gun in this game just feels outdated. It's not very consistent and very limited in its use, but it can still do enough to get you out of tricky situations. The other standout weapons are the alien-based weapons. They're a nice visual departure from the rest, and they actually are a lot more useful than the alien weapons from the original game, because there's way more variety within each weapon class. But even the more common additions like the sniper rifle and LMG were sorely needed. Being able to mow down a group of enemies with a single LMG mag, or choosing to clip them off one by one at a distance with the sniper rifle, is a fork in a road that every FPS game should have. These weren't the only positive changes made to the game, however. Thankfully, this expansion also cuts back on the platforming. That's not to say that there is none, but it's significantly less than the base game. Although that might have to do with the fact that the expansion is significantly shorter than the full game, so it may just be a result of the length of this game. But less of the bad is a positive in my book. You still have those moments where all you see are floating platforms, so you know you're about to have a terrible time, but those moments are outshined by the back-to-back shootouts for the most part. The gunplay and combat has always been the high point of these games, and it's no different here. But with many of those same high points, you also get many of its low points. And one of those low points is the lack of direction in a lot of these levels, including some of the boss fights as well. The final boss being one of them, mirroring the same issues that I had with the final boss of the base game. I spent way too much time looking for the right direction in some of these levels that it would actually sour my experience in these moments. Levels that required AI companions to open doors to proceed were probably the biggest culprits. I literally spent half an hour running back and forth, not being able to proceed because the AI wouldn't allow the doctor to open the next door for me. But the issues don't start and end with just the AI. Another issue that I had with the base game that managed to creep its way into this expansion is the lack of real-time feedback. This is especially awful during the final boss, once again, just like the original game. I couldn't tell if I was doing damage or not. It was so bad that I literally spent over an hour shooting at this thing, not knowing if I was making progress or not. Even with all of its issues, I still think that it's worth playing. It doesn't overstay its welcome, at least not enough for these issues to be overwhelming, and it adds enough new variety to the gameplay and story that it makes the experience fun and enjoyable. Blue Shift actually surprised me with how different it was compared to Opposing Force. Everything that Opposing Force did, both the good and the bad, was pulled back significantly, resulting in a much shorter game, lasting only about 3 hours at max. You play as Barney Calhoun, a security guard working at the facility during the events of Half-Life 1. And you must fight your way to safety during the invasion. Yep, it's that simple, and it doesn't get any more interesting than that. Similar to Opposing Force, the Easter eggs and cameos are fun when you encounter them, but all of those callbacks can't carry the player's interest throughout the entire game, even at its 3-hour length. I wish I could say that it gets more interesting as you go, but it really doesn't. The point of the entire expansion is just to escape, and spoiler alert, you escape. When I said that Valve pulled back significantly in every aspect for this expansion, I meant it. Not only do you get less story, you also get less weapons. The thing that Opposing Force did great is the thing that Blue Shift did poorly. I don't even think that you get 10 weapons in the entire game. I understand that it perhaps fits the player character a bit better for him to only have access to the most basic weapons because he's just a security guard. But let's be honest, Gordon was just an engineer. How does he know how to use all these military grade weapons? If we could suspend disbelief with Gordon, then we could do the same with Buddy Boy Barney. I'm just saying. But the reality is that there isn't much to say about the gameplay, considering that much of it didn't really change. Even with its significantly shorter length, Valve still somehow managed to shove an unbearable platforming section into the middle of it all, sandwiched between great level design and great puzzles. And that's the thing about Half-Life 1 and all of its expansions. It does so many things well, but then the things that it doesn't, they completely flop at it. Now, I know that it sounds like I'm saying that you should skip Blue Shift, but I honestly don't think that you should. It's quick and short fun. You can very easily jump into it and get your time's worth from it, and I would say the same thing about Opposing Force as well. These are expansions that are overlooked by a lot of people because of how overshadowed they are by the ongoing discussion about Half-Life 2 and all of its episodes, including the one that never happened. I frankly didn't even know that these expansions existed until I decided to go back into my backlog and play through all of these classic games. So for what it's worth, even after more than 20 years, I can say that these expansions are worth your time.